The little girl waited 28 minutes in the hallway of one of the most expensive hospitals in Seattle. A billionaire CEO walked through those halls and saw her bleeding beside a vending machine that sold $12 protein bars and imported sparkling water. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where her mother was. He didn't know that by the end of that night, a frightened 8-year-old girl in a red rain-soaked dress would force him to confront the one memory he had spent 20 years burying beneath glass buildings, private equity deals, and perfectly rehearsed press conferences. And nothing inside North Valley Medical Center would ever feel clean again. 48-year-old Ethan Cole had not built the North Valley Medical Group by believing in compassion. He built it by believing in systems. Systems were predictable. Systems scaled. Systems didn't cry in elevators or ask for second chances or fail because they were tired. People did. At 11:17 p.m., Ethan sat alone in the back seat of a charcoal Bentley Flying Spur parked beneath the glowing blue sign of North Valley Medical Center in downtown Seattle. Rain slid across the windows in long silver streaks. The heater hummed softly. The leather smelled faintly of cedar and expensive cologne. His suit jacket rested perfectly across his shoulders despite the 3-hour board meeting he had just survived. Ethan was the kind of man people described before they described his company. Tall, lean, controlled. His hair had gone silver early, mostly at the temples, giving him the severe elegance of a politician who never smiled for cameras unless absolutely necessary. His face carried no softness. Years of private negotiations and public pressure had sharpened him into something precise. People feared Ethan Cole because he rarely raised his voice. And because when he finally did, someone usually lost their job. North Valley Medical Group operated 12 private hospitals across the Pacific Northwest, 4 trauma centers, 8 outpatient campuses, revenue just under $6 billion annually. Investors loved Ethan because he turned healthcare into mathematics, efficiency, expansion, optimization. Those were his favorite words, not healing, not mercy, not care. 23 years earlier, Ethan had started as a hospital accountant with student debt, a dead father, and a mother who worked double shifts cleaning motel rooms near Tacoma. He remembered the smell of bleach on her hands when she tucked him into bed. He remembered unpaid bills stacked beside the microwave. Most of all, he remembered his younger sister Sophie, 10 years old, asthmatic, fragile. She died waiting for treatment in a county hospital hallway during one overcrowded winter flu season. Ethan never forgot the sound his mother made when the doctor said, "We did what we could." No, they didn't. And Ethan spent the next 20 years making sure he would never again belong to the kind of people forced to wait in hallways. The Bentley stopped beneath the emergency entrance. "Routine inspection?" his driver asked. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks. Something like that. Inside North Valley, the emergency department glowed with sterile white light. Machines beeped in soft rhythms. Nurses moved quickly through corridors polished so clean they reflected shoes. And near the east hallway beside Trauma Bay, 3 sat Lily Carter, 8 years old, small for her age, dark curls stuck damply against her forehead from the rain. Blood had dried in thin lines near her left ear. Her red dress was soaked from the paramedics carrying her through the storm. She sat curled sideways in a wheelchair because lying flat made her cry from the pain. Lily looked less like a trauma patient and more like a child who had simply fallen asleep somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. Except children sleeping don't usually leave blood on hospital blankets. Beside her stood Ava Brooks, 31 years old, emergency room nurse, single mother. Ava was tall in the way exhaustion sometimes makes women look taller. Narrow shoulders, dark brown skin, deep-set eyes permanently shadowed by years of overnight shifts and too little sleep. She wore her black hair tied tightly into a bun that had partially loosened during the shift. Her scrubs were wrinkled near the sleeves from constant movement, but there was gentleness in her hands, the kind that can't be taught in nursing school. Ava spoke softly to frightened patients, remembered names, stayed 5 extra minutes when everyone else rushed away. Not because she was naive, because 10 years earlier, when Noah was born premature and hooked to wires inside an overcrowded NICU, one exhausted nurse had sat beside Ava all night and whispered, "You're not alone." Some kindnesses rearrange people permanently. Ava looked toward the nurses' station again. "We need OR clearance now," she said. Across the counter stood Dr. Daniel Reeves, 55, head of emergency medicine. Reeves had the tired face of a man who once cared too much and then learned caring could become expensive. Thin grey hair, narrow posture. Reading glasses sliding constantly down his nose. Residents respected him, nurses tolerated him. Administration trusted him because he followed policy even when policy felt cruel. Especially then. "The VIP cardiac case takes priority," Reeves said quietly. Ava stared at him. "She's bleeding internally. We're verifying insurance." Ava almost laughed, not because it was funny, because she was too exhausted to scream. 28 minutes. That was how long Lily sat in the hallway while upstairs a wealthy real estate developer with mild chest pain occupied a fully staffed trauma suite. Rain hammered the hospital windows harder. Then Ethan Cole walked into the corridor. Conversation stopped almost immediately. People always noticed Ethan, not because he demanded attention, because his silence pulled it toward him. His eyes moved once across the hallway, the wheelchair, the blood, the child, the nurse beside her. And then his gaze landed on Daniel Reeves. "What is this?" Ethan asked. Nobody answered immediately. Even the monitors seemed quieter. Reeves stepped forward carefully. There was a prioritization delay. Ethan crossed the hallway before Reeves finished speaking. He grabbed the front of the doctor's coat and slammed him hard against the wall beside the medication cabinet. The sound cracked through the corridor. Gasps erupted behind them. A clipboard hit the floor. Lily flinched weakly in the wheelchair. Ethan's voice came low and sharp enough to cut skin. "You left a child bleeding in my hallway?" Reeves looked stunned, not angry, ashamed. Ava stood frozen beside Lily, because for the first time since she started working at North Valley, someone with actual power looked horrified instead of inconvenienced. And somewhere 3 miles away, in a small apartment above a Vietnamese grocery store near Harbor Avenue, 12-year-old Noah Brooks sat cross-legged on the floor, building a robotic arm from scavenged electronic parts while waiting for his mother to come home. He didn't know she was standing beside a dying little girl. He didn't know the hospital cameras above Hallway East had mysteriously lost 29 minutes of footage. And he didn't know that before sunrise, his mother's entire life inside North Valley Medical Center would begin to change. As Ava adjusted Lily's blanket, the little girl suddenly reached out and grabbed her wrist. Her fingers were tiny, cold, shaking. Ava leaned closer. Lily whispered weakly, "Don't call my mum." Ava frowned gently. "Why, sweetheart?" Lily swallowed painfully. "She's working night shift." Then the little girl's eyes rolled shut. And for one terrible second, Ava Brooks saw her own son sitting alone in the dark, waiting for her to come home. Rain continued falling over Seattle long after Lily Carter disappeared behind the operating room doors. The storm softened near dawn, but the city still looked drenched in exhaustion. Water slid down the glass walls of North Valley Medical Center in slow silver trails while inside The hospital resumed doing what expensive hospitals do best, moving forward as if nothing truly terrible had happened. But something had changed. People felt it in the hallways. Nurses spoke quieter when Ethan Cole walked past. Administrators suddenly avoided eye contact. Even the residents, usually too sleep-deprived to notice tension, sensed the atmosphere tightening around the executive floors like invisible wire. At 3:42 a.m., Ethan stood alone inside the hospital's Executive Operations Center, a dark room lined with glowing monitors displaying patient flow, surgery schedules, occupancy percentages, and real-time financial analytics. The room looked less like healthcare and more like air traffic control. North Valley measured everything: average wait time, bed turnover, revenue per patient hour. And hidden beneath layers of polished corporate language, another metric quietly shaped every emergency decision inside the building: insurance viability score. Ethan stared at the screen in silence. A patient chart blinked red, then yellow, then green, as the algorithm recalculated treatment priority based on insurance classification and projected reimbursement value. He read the coding twice before speaking. "What is this?" Beside him stood Lydia Mercer, Chief Operations Administrator, 46 years old, sharp-featured, impossibly composed. Lydia wore her blonde hair cut precisely at shoulder length and dressed almost exclusively in charcoal suits that matched the hospital walls. She had spent 15 years climbing through healthcare administration by mastering one skill better than anyone else around her: remaining emotionally untouched. People trusted Lydia because she never panicked. People feared Lydia because she never apologized. "It's the triage optimization system," she answered calmly. "It helps reduce financial inefficiencies in emergency response allocation." Ethan looked at her. That child sat in a hallway bleeding. Lydia folded her hands neatly in front of her. "The system prioritizes survivability ratios alongside reimbursement sustainability." The sentence hung in the room like poison dressed in expensive vocabulary. Ethan suddenly remembered another hallway. Another winter. Another child waiting too long because someone somewhere had calculated that another patient mattered more. Sophie had been 10 years old. She wore yellow rain boots with tiny white stars painted near the soles. Ethan remembered those boots because she kept kicking them nervously against the hospital chair while struggling to breathe. No doctor came for 47 minutes. He had counted. Back then, Ethan believed money was the reason she died. Now, he was no longer certain money had been the worst part. Maybe it was the system itself. Across the hospital on the 6th floor, Dr. Daniel Reeves sat alone in his office with both hands covering his face. The overhead light buzzed softly above him. His coffee had gone cold hours ago. He looked older tonight. Not physically, spiritually. Reeves had once been considered one of the finest emergency physicians in Washington state. 20 years earlier, he was the kind of doctor who stayed after shifts ended, who remembered birthdays of pediatric patients, who slept in his office during flu outbreaks because he refused to leave overwhelmed nurses alone. Then life became expensive. His wife Claire developed stage 3 ovarian cancer 3 years ago. Treatment costs swallowed savings first, then retirement accounts, then dignity. North Valley's executive insurance package was the only reason Claire was still alive. And systems like that have a way of teaching people exactly how much morality costs. A soft knock interrupted him. Ethan entered without waiting for permission. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Reeves quietly said, "She made it through surgery." Ethan nodded once. "That little girl waited 28 minutes. Reeves stared down at his desk. "I know. You approved it." Another silence. Finally, Reeves whispered, You think I don't hear those families when I go home? His voice cracked slightly at the edges. My wife has chemo every Thursday. Do you understand what happens if I lose this job? Ethan looked at him carefully for the first time all night. Not as an employee, as a tired man drowning slowly. Reeves opened a desk drawer and removed a photograph. Claire Reeves smiled weakly from a hospital bed, bald from chemotherapy, but still somehow warm-eyed. She was a pediatric nurse for 22 years, Reeves said quietly. If I fought the board over every unethical decision in this building, she'd be dead already. Ethan said nothing, because somewhere beneath the anger, he understood. That was the problem. Meanwhile, 3 miles south near Harbour Avenue, Noah Brooks sat in the back row of Roosevelt Middle School trying to keep his broken laptop alive by pressing the charger cord at exactly the right angle. 12 years old, thin, restless, too smart for his own good. Noah had inherited Ava's eyes and his absent father's stubbornness. He wore oversized hoodies year-round because growing kids outgrow clothes faster than single mothers can replace them. His robotics teacher, Mr. Eli Navarro, paused beside Noah's desk during class. Navarro was 34, broad-shouldered, heavily tattooed, with the permanent exhaustion of a former Marine who now taught public school science because he believed somebody had to care about the kids everyone else ignored. "You finished the ARM prototype?" Navarro asked quietly. "Almost." Before Noah could say more, laughter erupted 2 desks behind him. Carter Flynn leaned back in his chair, grinning. 14. Wealthy parents, expensive sneakers. The kind of kid who had never once worried whether lights at home would stay on. Maybe if his mum spent less time saving homeless people, Carter muttered loudly, she could buy him a real computer. A few students laughed. Noah kept staring at the screen. His ears turned red, but he said nothing, because children who grow up watching exhausted mothers work night shifts learn early that silence sometimes costs less than anger. Back at North Valley, Marcus Hale sat hunched over a maintenance terminal deep in the hospital basement. Marcus was 27, narrow-framed, pale from too many overnight shifts and too little sunlight. He wore thick glasses constantly sliding down his nose and owned exactly 3 hoodies, all grey. People underestimated Marcus because he spoke softly and avoided eye contact. What people missed was that Marcus noticed everything, especially patterns, especially missing ones. At 6:11 a.m., he finally recovered fragments of deleted hallway footage. The timestamp froze him completely. 28 minutes. Lily Carter remained in hallway east 28 full minutes before surgical clearance. Marcus leaned back slowly. Someone with executive-level authorization had erased the footage intentionally. And suddenly, the basement felt colder than before. Later that evening, Ava Brooks arrived for another night shift and found a sealed envelope waiting in her locker. Inside was a formal disciplinary warning, failure to comply with administrative triage directives, unauthorized escalation of surgical demands, unprofessional conduct during emergency allocation procedures. Ava read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. No anger, no tears, just exhaustion, because survival leaves very little energy for outrage. Near midnight, after the city lights dimmed beneath another sheet of rain, Ethan returned to his penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay. The apartment was enormous and painfully quiet. No family photographs, no music, no signs anyone actually lived there except him. He walked into a storage room rarely opened and removed a small cardboard box from the top shelf. Inside sat a pair of tiny yellow rain boots with faded white stars near the soles. Sophie's boots. Ethan lowered himself slowly into a chair. Outside, Seattle rain tapped softly against the windows. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole did not know how to convince himself he had built something good. 3 days after the incident with Lily Carter, Ava Brooks stopped appearing on the emergency floor. Nobody officially explained why. North Valley Medical Center preferred quiet punishments. Quiet punishments left no paperwork for reporters to discover later. At 6:10 p.m. on a rain-heavy Thursday evening, Ava stepped out of the elevator into sublevel 2, the oldest section of the hospital. The air smelled faintly of bleach, mildew, and overheated pipes. Fluorescent lights buzzed weakly overhead, flickering every few seconds like they were struggling to stay awake. This was overflow care. The basement unit where North Valley sent the patients nobody profitable wanted to claim. Homeless men with infected feet. Construction workers paid in cash who avoided insurance forms. Addicts detoxing beneath thin blankets. Undocumented immigrants terrified of signing their real names. People arrived here when the system had already decided they were too expensive to save properly. Ava adjusted the sleeves of her navy scrub jacket and walked past room B12, where an old golden retriever slept, curled beside a patient bed. The dog belonged to Walter Green, a 68-year-old homeless veteran with liver failure and nicotine yellow fingers that trembled constantly from untreated nerve damage. The dog's name was Rusty, 13 years old, blind in one eye. Gentle enough that nurses smuggled him scraps from the cafeteria despite hospital policy forbidding animals. Walter scratched behind Rusty's ears slowly when Ava entered. "You're the new basement angel?" he asked with a dry laugh. Ava smiled faintly. Closest thing they could afford. Walter grinned, exposing crooked teeth, worn down by decades of cheap cigarettes and bad winters. People in the basement liked Ava immediately because she spoke to them the way exhausted people want to be spoken to, directly, without pity. Around midnight, Ethan Cole arrived at the hospital without notifying administration. Again, he wore a dark wool coat over a charcoal sweater instead of his usual tailored suit. The security guards nodded nervously as he passed. Ethan had started walking the hospital alone at night lately, saying very little, observing everything. Tonight he wandered farther than before, down to sub-level 2. He paused outside room B12 and looked through the narrow glass panel. Ava sat beside Walter Green adjusting his IV manually because the infusion pump kept malfunctioning. Her posture sagged with exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed her eyes deeper than before. She had already worked 14 hours. At 12:43 a.m., she removed her wallet quietly and slipped $40 into a pharmacy request envelope attached to Walter's chart. The medication wasn't fully covered. She paid anyway. Ethan watched without moving. No performance, no audience, no expectation anyone important would ever know. Just a tired nurse spending grocery money on a dying stranger. Across the hall, a young Guatemalan dishwasher named Mateo Ruiz lay sleeping beneath 2 blankets. 22 years old, thin as wire. Burn scars climbed his left forearm from a kitchen grease accident his employer never reported because undocumented workers complicated insurance claims. Mateo spoke almost no English, but every time Ava checked his temperature, he whispered, "Gracias, nurse." Like the words themselves were fragile. At 2:18 a.m., Ava finally sat down in the staff break room. The room was barely larger than a storage closet. 1 flickering lamp, 1 coffee machine older than Noah, 1 torn recliner duct-taped at the armrest. She set an alarm on her phone for 12 minutes. Not 15, not 20, 12. Then she closed her eyes. Exactly 12 minutes later, the alarm buzzed softly, and Ava stood up immediately, splashed cold water on her face, and returned to work, without complaint. Ethan remained in the hallway long after she left the room, because something about those 12 minutes unsettled him more than anger ever had. Meanwhile, across Seattle, Noah Brooks sat inside Roosevelt Middle School's robotics lab, surrounded by wires, broken circuit boards, and empty soda cans. The regional robotics finalists had been announced an hour earlier. Noah made the list. His project sat half-finished on the table before him, a low-cost robotic stabilizer designed to help elderly patients lift medicine bottles with trembling hands. Most competitors used expensive 3D printers and corporate-sponsored parts. Noah used scrapyard motors and salvaged hospital disposal electronics Marcus secretly helped him collect. Mr. Eli Navarro rested a hand on Noah's shoulder. "Told you they'd notice." Noah smiled for the first time all week. A small smile, brief, careful, the kind poor kids learn to make because joy feels dangerous when life changes too fast. Back at North Valley, Marcus Hale opened his email at 3:07 a.m. and froze. Unknown sender. No subject line. Inside was a single sentence. "Stop digging through deleted files unless you want your life audited too." Marcus swallowed hard. The basement suddenly felt very small around him. Upstairs, Dr. Daniel Reeves sat alone in his office reviewing chemotherapy invoices while rain tapped softly against the windows. Then quietly, almost trembling, he forwarded 3 confidential internal reports to Ethan Cole's private encrypted account. Patient prioritization data, insurance escalation protocols, emergency delay statistics, proof. Not enough to destroy North Valley, but enough to wound it. And guilt, Ethan was beginning to understand, makes people dangerous. Near sunrise, Ethan entered the hospital security room. Rows of surveillance monitors glowed blue in the darkness. Camera feeds flickered silently across dozens of screens. He found Sub-Level 2. Found Ava. She sat beside Walter Green, gently helping the old man drink water because his hands shook too badly to hold the cup himself. Rusty slept at Walter's feet. Ava smiled at something the old man whispered, and Ethan realized with quiet horror that he had not seen that kind of tenderness inside one of his hospitals in years. Not real tenderness, not the kind nobody bills for. The storm arrived just after midnight, not ordinary Seattle rain, not the soft grey drizzle people joked about while carrying overpriced coffee beneath umbrellas. This storm came with ocean wind, strong enough to bend traffic lights and shake windows inside buildings designed to survive earthquakes. At 12:14 a.m., lightning struck somewhere near the Harbor District. 7 seconds later, North Valley Medical Center lost power. Everything disappeared at once. The lights, the monitors, the elevators, the soft electronic heartbeat of the hospital itself. Darkness crashed through the building so suddenly that several patients screamed before emergency backup systems kicked in. Then only parts of the hospital returned. The VIP surgical wing relit first. Warm lights flooded private recovery suites on the upper floors, while the rest of North Valley remained trapped in flickering red emergency illumination. Because the generator system had been configured years ago to prioritize premium revenue sectors during catastrophic failure events. Even the blackout followed policy. Down in overflow care, Ava Brooks looked up as half the hallway lights died completely. Somewhere nearby, an oxygen alarm began shrieking. "Flashlights," she ordered immediately. Her voice stayed calm even while everything around her destabilized. That was Ava's gift, not fearlessness, functioning while afraid. Nurses scrambled through supply closets while patients shouted in confusion. Rain hammered the basement-level windows hard enough to sound like fists against glass. Walter Green clutched Rusty tightly as the old dog whimpered beside the bed. "I knew rich hospitals would kill me fancy," Walter muttered weakly. Ava almost smiled despite herself. Nearby, Mateo Ruiz sat upright in panic because the automated translation tablets had stopped working with the power outage. He couldn't understand the announcements echoing through the dark hallways. Ava crouched beside him. "It's okay," she said slowly. "Tormentor only. You're safe." Mateo nodded shakily. Not because he fully understood the words, because he trusted her face. Upstairs, the executive command center exploded into chaos. Backup power percentages flashed across monitors, while department heads shouted overlapping updates into dead communication systems. Lydia Mercer stood at the center of it all, still composed despite the blackout. Her sharp features looked almost ghost-like beneath emergency lighting. "We maintain VIP life support first," she announced coldly. "General overflow can be manually stabilized." Ethan stared at her. "People are dying downstairs." "And people upstairs are paying millions to not die first," Lydia answered. For one dangerous second, nobody in the room moved. Then Ethan removed his suit jacket, dropped it across a chair, and walked toward the stairwell. "Where are you going?" Lydia asked sharply. Ethan didn't slow down. "To the patients." It was the first time anyone in that room had ever seen him choose the hospital over the business. By 12:49 a.m., Ethan stood inside sub-level 2, helping transport patients manually through dark corridors lit only by emergency lanterns. His expensive dress shirt clung damply to his back from sweat and humidity. He pushed gurneys beside exhausted nurses while rainwater leaked through old ceiling seams overhead. Nobody spoke about who he was anymore. In a blackout, titles matter less than hands. Then Lily Carter crashed again. The monitors in Pediatric Recovery Wing 3 lost stable synchronization when emergency power fluctuated. Her oxygen support failed for 13 seconds. 13 seconds was enough. By the time Ava reached the room, Lily's pulse had nearly vanished. Dr. Daniel Reeves stood frozen beside the bed while alarms screamed through the darkness. The portable defibrillator battery was dead. One nurse whispered, "We're losing her." Reeves looked down at the child's small body and saw Sophie Cole. Saw every hallway patient he'd failed quietly over the years because policy was easier than resistance. Then something inside him broke. "Move!" he snapped. He climbed onto the bed rail and began manual compressions. 1, 2, 3. Sweat rolled down his face despite the cold. At minute 4, his arms started shaking. At minute 7, one of the younger nurses began crying quietly. At minute 9, Reeves nearly collapsed from exhaustion, but he didn't stop, because some men spend years surrendering themselves piece by piece until one moment finally arrives where surrender becomes impossible. Elsewhere across the city, Noah Brooks sat inside his apartment, staring at the blinking school competition portal on his cracked laptop screen. Storm interference kept disconnecting the upload. His robotic submission deadline expired in 11 minutes. Noah's fingers moved frantically across the keyboard as thunder rattled the windows. "Come on," he whispered. The file froze at 93%, then disconnected. Noah closed his eyes hard for 1 second before rerouting through the school server manually using old coding shortcuts Marcus once showed him. At 1:03 a.m. the upload succeeded. Noah leaned back, shaking with relief. At almost the exact same moment, Marcus Hale uploaded the recovered hallway footage anonymously to 3 local news servers and 2 independent journalists. The video showed everything: Lily, waiting, the delay, the timestamps. By morning, North Valley Medical Center would no longer control the story. Back in Pediatric Recovery, Wing 3, Dr. Reeves continued compressions with blood vessels visibly burst red in his eyes. 10 minutes, then 11. Suddenly the monitor beeped once, then again, then stabilized into rhythm. The room went silent. Nobody breathed. And in the darkness beside the bed, Ethan Cole covered his mouth with one trembling hand, as tears finally slid down his face for the first time since his sister died 20 years earlier. Because somewhere beneath the billion-dollar systems and executive policies and optimized patient algorithms, a little girl's heartbeat had forced him to remember that hospitals were supposed to save people, not sort them. By sunrise, the hallway footage had spread across Seattle, then across Washington, then nationally. News anchors replayed the same 28 minutes over and over again. A bleeding 8-year-old girl left waiting beneath fluorescent lights while nurses rushed past carrying paperwork instead of treatment authorization. North Valley Medical Center became the story everyone suddenly claimed they had always suspected. By noon, protesters gathered outside the hospital entrance, holding handmade signs soaked by rain. Healthcare is not a luxury. She was 8 years old. People before profits. Inside the executive boardroom on the 20th floor, panic wore expensive suits. North Valley's board members sat around a polished walnut table worth more than most Seattle families earned in 6 months. Phones vibrated non-stop. Stock alerts flashed red across tablets. Investors demanded explanations. And at the center of the storm sat Ethan Cole, silent, watching. Harold Bennett spoke first. Harold was 71 years old, chairman of the board, silver-haired and broad-shouldered despite age. He carried himself like a man who had spent decades believing wealth was evidence of moral superiority. His voice always sounded calm, even while destroying people's careers. "We need containment," Harold said flatly. "Immediately." Lydia Mercer nodded beside him. "The narrative must remain operational failure," she added, "not institutional design." Operational failure, as if children accidentally waited alone in hallways. Harold slid 2 folders across the table. Ava Brooks. Daniel Reeves, scapegoats. Reeves for procedural negligence. Ava for unauthorized escalation and media exposure risk. Ethan looked at the folders but didn't touch them. "You want to blame the nurse who tried to save her?" "We want the company to survive," Harold answered. There it was. Not cruelty. Worse, calculation. Harold leaned forward slightly. "You built this organization over 20 years, Ethan. One emotional reaction cannot destroy everything. Everything. Private hospitals, research grants, political influence, billions." Outside the windows, Seattle rain blurred the skyline into gray, watercolor streaks. For the first time in years, Ethan realized he no longer knew whether North Valley was protecting people or feeding on them. Meanwhile, downstairs in the pediatric wing, Ava Brooks sat beside Lily Carter's hospital bed, helping the little girl color with dull crayons donated from the gift shop. Lily looked smaller now. The oxygen tubes beneath her nose made her seem fragile in a way children never should. She drew crooked stars across construction paper while Ava adjusted her blankets. "You draw bad moons," Lily whispered seriously. Ava laughed softly. "I work in emergency medicine, not art school." Across the room sat Lily's mother, Denise Carter, 36 years old, night janitor at Pike Place Market, thin from exhaustion. Quiet in the way people become quiet after spending years apologizing for being poor. She twisted tissues nervously between her fingers every time doctors entered the room. Not because she distrusted them. Because people like Denise are taught early that institutions become dangerous when you can't afford mistakes. Elsewhere across the city, Noah Brooks stood inside the regional robotics auditorium wearing a borrowed dress shirt slightly too large at the shoulders. The scholarship finalists waited nervously beside their projects while judges moved through exhibits with clipboards and polite smiles. Noah's robotic stabilizer sat patched together from scrap aluminum, salvaged motors, and reused wiring. Beside corporate-sponsored projects, it looked homemade, because it was. When the judges announced first place, Noah didn't react immediately. He only blinked, like his brain needed extra time believing good things could happen to him too. Mr. Navarro nearly crushed him in a hug. "You did it, kid." But later, when the Academy representative offered Noah a full private STEM scholarship 3 states away, he quietly shook his head. "I can't leave my mom." The recruiter stared at him in confusion. Noah just smiled awkwardly. Some children grow up too early to mistake opportunity for freedom. That same evening, Marcus Hale left a convenience store 3 blocks from his apartment, carrying instant noodles and energy drinks when someone slammed him hard into the brick wall beside the alley. Pain exploded across his ribs. A hooded man grabbed Marcus by the collar. "No more uploads," the stranger hissed. Then he disappeared into the rain before Marcus could respond. Marcus slid down the wall, breathing hard, blood running from his split lip. For the first time since releasing the footage, he understood people were actually afraid. And frightened, powerful people are dangerous. At 7 p.m., Seattle City Hall overflowed with reporters, cameras, and furious citizens for the Emergency Healthcare Oversight hearing. Ethan Cole entered alone. No lawyers, no public relations team, just Ethan. Ava watched from the back row beside Dr. Reeves, whose hands trembled slightly from lack of sleep and accumulated shame. Then Ethan began speaking, not carefully, not strategically, truthfully. He described the triage algorithm, the insurance prioritization metrics, the executive directives, the shareholder pressure. Screens behind him displayed internal documents Reeves secretly provided, delay percentages, revenue calculations, VIP escalation protocols. Gasps spread across the chamber. By the time Ethan finished naming the board members responsible for implementing the system, North Valley stock had already begun collapsing online. Harold Bennett left the hearing halfway through. Lydia Mercer never looked up from her phone. And Ethan Cole, founder of North Valley Medical Group, destroyed the empire he built with his own voice. At 11:46 p.m., the board voted unanimously to remove him as CEO effective immediately. No farewell speech, no applause, no ceremony, just paperwork. Rain still fell when Ethan finally walked alone through the underground parking structure carrying a cardboard box with 20 years of office belongings inside. Ava stood near the elevator waiting for him. For a moment neither spoke. Then Ava quietly asked, "If you knew this would cost you everything, would you still do it?" Ethan looked tired for the first time since she met him. Not physically, humanly. "There are some things," he said softly, "you have to lose before you find out whether there's still a person left underneath them." Then he walked into the rain without looking back. 6 months after the hearing, Seattle still remembered the little girl in the hallway. People forgot scandals quickly, politicians, celebrities, financial fraud. The world moved on from most disasters with terrifying efficiency, but not this one, because somewhere beneath the headlines and lawsuits and collapsing stock prices had been something painfully simple. A child waited too long for help. And once people saw it, they could not unsee it. In early spring, the Seattle City Council passed the Carter Emergency Access Act, a city-funded program guaranteeing emergency treatment coverage for low-income children regardless of insurance verification status. News stations praised it, activists celebrated it, hospital executives quietly hated it. But it passed anyway. North Valley Medical Group survived, though smaller now, weaker, restructured beneath new leadership that removed Ethan Cole's name from nearly every public-facing document within weeks. As if corporations believed history could be edited by changing signage. Near the Harbour District on Pier Avenue, Ava Brooks unlocked the front door of Harbour Free Clinic every morning at 6:45 a.m. The clinic used to be a small dental office abandoned after the pandemic. The floors creaked. The heating system worked only when kicked twice near the basement pipe. Half the waiting chairs came from thrift stores, but people came anyway, because unlike North Valley, nobody asked for insurance cards before offering blankets. Ava looked different now, still tired, still overworked, but lighter somehow. She wore simple navy scrubs and old sneakers with fading soles. Her hair stayed shorter these days because she no longer had time to maintain the careful bun required by corporate hospital dress codes. Children trusted her immediately. So did old people. There are some faces suffering recognizes as safe. At 9:12 a.m., Dr. Daniel Reeves entered carrying 2 trays of coffee and a paper bag full of pastries he definitely could not afford on his current salary, or lack of one. Reeves no longer worked for North Valley. He had surrendered his executive medical license after the hearing and now volunteered full-time at Harbour Free Clinic, treating uninsured patients. Oddly enough, he smiled more now. Not often, but honestly. Claire's chemotherapy had gone into remission 3 months earlier. The lines beneath Reeves' eyes remained permanent, but guilt no longer sat on him quite so heavily. "You still buy terrible coffee," Ava muttered. Reeves handed her a cup. "And you still drink it." Across the clinic lobby, Lily Carter carefully took 4 shaky steps between parallel bars during physical therapy while her mother, Denise, watched from nearby, trying unsuccessfully not to cry. Lily still limped slightly, still tired easily, but she walked, and every step felt miraculous. "Look," Lily whispered proudly. "No hands." Ava clapped immediately. So did Denise. So did Reeves, because survival becomes sacred after people almost lose you. Meanwhile, across the country in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Professor Eleanor Whitmore replayed Noah Brooks' robotics presentation for the 3rd time. Eleanor was 63 years old, head of biomedical engineering outreach at MIT, with silver curls constantly escaping loose hairpins, and the distracted intensity of someone whose brain moved faster than conversations around her. She had spent decades searching for brilliance in expensive prep schools. Then she found Noah, a poor kid from Seattle who built adaptive medical robotics from salvaged scrap parts because he couldn't afford proper equipment. "Find him," she told her assistant quietly. "Immediately." Back in Seattle, Marcus Hale sat inside a cramped newsroom office surrounded by medical records, coffee stains, and stacks of investigative notes. Marcus looked older now. Bruises healed yellow along his ribs where the attack left lasting tenderness beneath the skin. But fear had changed shape inside him. It no longer made him smaller. The Seattle Ledger hired him 2 months earlier after his leaked footage exposed North Valley. Now Marcus specialized in healthcare corruption investigations. His newest article headline glowed across the monitor: "Private hospitals spent more on lobbying than charity care last year." Marcus smiled faintly, not happy, purposeful. And Ethan Cole vanished. No interviews, no public statements, no luxury conferences. For 6 months, nobody knew where the former CEO lived. Rumors circulated constantly: Europe, Canada, a private island somewhere near Vancouver. None were true. On a cold April night, rain returned to Seattle again. Ava stayed late, finishing paperwork, while the clinic lights hummed softly overhead. Most patients had gone home hours earlier. Only the hallway light near the entrance remained on. Then the front door opened quietly. A tall man stepped inside wearing a black wool coat damp with rainwater. Ethan Cole. He looked thinner now, less polished, his silver hair slightly longer than before. The sharpness remained, but something quieter lived beneath it now. Not weakness, absence, like a man still learning who he was without power. Neither spoke immediately. Ethan walked to the reception desk and placed down a sealed envelope. "No return address," he said softly. "Anonymous donor." Ava opened it carefully. Inside was a certified funding grant large enough to keep Harbour Free Clinic operating for 2 more years. She looked up slowly. "You planning to keep hiding from the world?" she asked. Rain tapped softly against the windows behind him. Ethan smiled faintly, the smallest smile she had ever seen from him. "No," he said after a moment. "It's just the first time in my life I don't want to stand above it anymore." Then he turned and walked back into the rain. Ava watched him disappear beneath the streetlights until the darkness swallowed him completely. Outside, Seattle still looked grey, still cold, still wet. But inside Harbour Free Clinic, the hallway light stayed on long after midnight. And this time, nobody waiting beneath it was alone. Sometimes, the people carrying the heaviest burdens are the ones who complain the least, the ones still showing up for work while their hearts are tired, the ones smiling at their children after crying alone in the car, the ones quietly helping others even when nobody helps them back. This story was never really about a hospital. It was about the small choices we make every day, the choice to stop and help, the choice to stay kind after life hardens us, the choice to see people the world has stopped noticing. Ethan learned that success means very little if it costs your humanity. Ava reminded us that kindness does not need wealth, power, or recognition. Sometimes the strongest people are simply the ones who keep showing up with a gentle heart in a hard world. In everyday life, we may never save someone in an emergency room hallway, but we can answer a message, offer a ride, listen without judgment, be patient with a tired cashier, check on someone who seems quiet. Small acts of compassion become light in places people thought would stay dark forever. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need encouragement today. Leave a comment and tell us what moment stayed with you the most. And if you still believe kindness matters, comment amen for every person out there silently carrying pain while trying to stay strong for others. Subscribe for more stories that remind us what it means to stay human in a world that sometimes forgets. May God bless you, protect your family, heal every hidden wound in your heart, and guide you safely through every storm you are walking through right now. Amen.